by faith. Here is a lovely story copied from a book called Molesworth by L.W. McCaskill, from page 45 going onwards, called Old Bill, from a cattle drove in 1876. Quote, I stayed the night at Rainbow. I'd been all day travelling through that narrow portion of the Wairau River to wide open country. The river hard turned sharp to the right, keeping to the hills, which stretched on way forward to the right. The plain I entered into stretched for several miles in front of me. Beyond this expansive plain there were the steep, rough-looking hills again. The hills were the grazing grounds for thousands of merino sheep. In the valley were the grazing grounds of hundreds of cattle. I'd been mustering and droving for several years, and although I didn't know it then, I know that at some time I decided to come up to this country. I knew a great many other chaps who followed the mustering work, and I'd met an occasion one who'd worked on Molesworth and Tarndale. I'd always had the impression that these were real high country men, and although I couldn't admit it, I wanted to be one of them, even though I knew I would get plenty of other work much nearer town. So I rode along the beaten track, and as I turned around at the bottom of the spur from a mountain on my right, I saw a man with a pair of bullocks dragging a sledge loaded with firewood a short way ahead of me, and further ahead was that small cottage. When I caught up with them, we bid each other the time of day. He was a strong-built man of medium height, brown curly whiskers, brown hair. He asked which way I was heading. I told him I wasn't sure myself yet. I was looking for a job. He said, oh well, I don't think you'll have much trouble finding one. After we'd gone along together for a while, he says, did you come up from Rainbow today? I said, yep. My name's Bill. He replied, mine's Jack Fitch. How are you, Bill? We shook hands. Jack said, I think you'd better come stay with us tonight, Bill. The Tarndale homestead is further on still, and I'm not sure you'll find anyone at home there. I thanked him, and as we got near the cottage I could hear a dog barking, and I could see a woman standing near the front door. Jack drove the bullocks up to the side of the house and stopping them not far from the garden gate. I took my gear off my horse and at Jack's direction he let him go in with the bullocks. We both walked back to the house and Jack introduced me to his wife Frida. She was a pleasant-looking woman and spoke with a slight German accent. She was fair and good-looking with an abundant crop of hair, and for a woman, she seemed very strong. She was very happy and friendly, and I at once took a liking to her. Jack told me that I was going to stay the night, and she pointed out a lean-to at the end of the cottage where she said I could put my belongings. She showed me where I could find water for a wash, told me to come inside when I was ready and we'd have tea. When I entered the cottage, I found it consisted of one large room, with a portion curtained off at one end and a very large chimney at the other end. The larger portion served as a dining room and a kitchen combined. Table was set, and as I entered, and Frida, all smiles and chatted, directed me to a seat at the side of the table, while she and Jack sat at either end. After tea, Jack and I sat on a bench outside the door, while Frida did the wash-up. Later, she brought a stool out and sat with us. Jack pointed out the direction of Tarndale homestead, and sketching a plan on the ground with a stick, he pointed out the direction of Molesworth, showing on his sketch the different rivers and creeks lying between. Molesworth, he said, was on the Awatere River, but all the others, such as the Severn, Saxton, Archeron, flowed into the Clarence. Looking in the opposite direction, he marked out another branch of the Clarence, which started at Lake Tennyson and flowed down past St. James. All the mountains about here, although rough and precipitous, seemed quite low to me. When I mentioned this to Jack, he explained that where we were standing was over 3,000 feet above sea level, and that in general rule these were only 2,000 or 3,000 feet higher above us, which makes them actually 5,000 or 6,000 foot mountains. As evening drew on, they told me they'd be sending cattle to a place in the Grey River, which is on the opposite side of the Alps on the west coast, and Frida was anxious to find someone to drive them. Sensing the chance of a job I'd been looking for, I suggested they give me the job. I noticed they exchanged glances, and then Jack says, "What do you think, Frida?" Frida says, "Oh yes, Jack. Bill will take them. All right then, Jack, you can take them. Jack then described the route I'd have to take. He told me he'd get a sketch plan, which I could take with me. With this plan, he was sure I couldn't go wrong. We'd go get the cattle together in the morning, and then I could start as soon as I like. Jack explained that they were due to be delivered the cattle on the 17th of March 1876, near the junction of the Robinson and Grey River, which is about 50 miles from the west coast, but still on the other side of the mountain range, to a man named McNeil, who paid for the cattle on delivery. The price had been fixed at £5 a head. Next morning, after breakfast, Jack and I started off to gather up the cattle. Those I was to take were 3 or 4 year-old steers. There were 20 steers all told, and it didn't take long to cut them out and start them on the way back home. We got there early in the afternoon and put them in the paddock near the house. All the next day, except for attending to our horses' shoes and getting the packs ready, we had a spell at home. In the evening, Jack produced his maps, and together we went over the journey I was to take. It was a sketch map in 3 sections showing the rivers and the large creeks in black, with prominent features such as mountains, flats, gorges, all marked and written in, with the track I was to take, continuing right through on red dots. Wasn't to scale, but it was approximate distance between prominent points had all been written in. Early next morning we started the cattle on the road. Jack and Frida were going to see me as far as Lake Tennyson. I started off to lead and Jack and Frida came along to the rear. The cattle handled well, and we took them along very slowly. Although we were travelling on an upgrade, they never showed the least sign of stress, and we were soon following my horse just like an old stager. At midday we reached the island saddle, and soon we were making our way steadily onto the other side to Lake Tennyson. When we got there, we passed the outlet, turned the cattle over toward Malling Pass, and then stopped, made ourselves a cup of tea. Later in the afternoon, we'd crossed the Malling Pass from the site of the Wowrow Valley. We let the cattle drift for a while, and after which Jack and Frida left me and made their way back for home. Before they left me, they told me I'd stay that following night at Ada Station and asked me to give their kind regards to Mac and Joe, who'd take care of me and help me wherever I needed. So Bill continued on, having an exciting passage over the Cannibal Gorge, delivered his cattle, collected the 100 gold sovereigns. He spent 5 nights in the open, 3 in huts. He continues, I was soon on my way back from the Ada hut, heading up the Waiau, and soon through the Mallings Pass I continued on to Lake Tennyson, where I stopped and let the horse graze for a bit, had my lunch and a drink of water at the lake outlet. In about 3/4 of an hour we're on our way again, along the shore of the lake, heading up the island saddle. We crossed over the saddle, soon had the Wairau River on our left, with a well-beaten horse pad to follow. Arriving down at the flat, we soon had Jack Fitch's homestead in view. Just then I noticed the horse turned its head to the left, and by his gait I knew someone was coming up from behind us. It was Jack Fitch cantering up through the gorge towards us. He soon caught up with us and asked us what sort of trip I'd had. I said, all right, I've landed the cattle, been paid for them. He said, good. Wait till you see the stack of wood I've carted while you were away. I've got enough to last us all winter. We had some rain a couple of days ago and were wondering where you were if you got it. It brought on a bit fresh. We were now getting close to the cottage and I could see Frida standing at the door. She called to us as we rode up, seeming very glad to see us. Jack said to sleep in the same place, and we pulled our saddles off, turned out the horses through the gate. I got my coat out of my pack, and after feeling to make sure the money was in my pocket, I went in. Frida was busy dishing up the meal, and Jack was sitting at the table. I took one of the other chairs. Before sitting, I put the money on the table in front of him and said, there you are, Jack, you better count that. He said, all right, Bill, and just left it right where it put it. After we started our meal, I knew Frida was waiting for Jack to count the money, but he talked casually about other things, concentrating mostly on the amount of firewood he'd got. After tea, Jack and I sat on the seats outside, got our pipes going. Freda joined us and sat on the doorstep. Then Jack asked, "Was McNeil waiting for you when you got there with the cattle?" I told him, "Nah." He said McNeil's mates had taken delivery of the cattle and paid me, and went on and gave me an outline of the whole trip. I could tell Freda was interested in the whole journey, and she said she was how glad she was that I'd come along to take the cattle through. Otherwise, she'd have to stop at home by herself or go with Jack. After we discussed the cattle, Jack asked if I'd like to stop on for a while with them, or was I going to push further on. I decided I'd stay a day or two to lend a hand with some fencing and then head in the direction of Molesworth. By this time it was nearly dark. Freda lit the lamp and Jack and I went in. Jack picked up the bag, counted the money and said, "All there." Freda seemed to get more joy out of the money than either Jack or I, laughingly telling Jack of all the things she was going to buy next time she went to town. I felt grand being with these people. They were very fine, and I felt satisfied that my first job on the Tarndale country had been a success. The end. The spiritual application. Old Bill had never met these folk before. They trusted him to deliver the cattle to the buyer far, far away on the opposite side of a rugged and precipitous mountain range, and then to return with the money. Now, to put this in the perspective, the story is in 1876, not today. Now, a 3-year-old steer in good condition is valued at around about $2,500 a head. $3,000 for a good one. Now, 20 times $2,500 is a huge $50,000, or 20 times $3,000 is $60,000. And then you entrust a complete stranger solely on good faith. Could you be trusted? 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20. What, know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own? You have been bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Your soul, your body, your all are bought at Calvary at a price that was very high. God willingly paid it. Are you value for money? Or have you wandered away from God? God has entrusted you with many talents. Are you returning them to God or embezzling them? God entrusted you by faith. Are you obeying and serving by faith? Are you faithful in all that you do? Romans 1:17. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Let us be faithful in all our ways, in all our days.